Can you believe it? She threw a rock and completely shattered my window just because I didn't comply with HOA's ridiculous demands. I just wanted a peaceful life, but I became the target of a tyrannical hoe, and it didn't stop there. What would you do if you were in my situation? Leave a comment below. Green Park, a gated community with pristine streets, neatly trimmed lawns, and houses that look almost identical. When I first arrived, I thought I had found the perfect place to start over. A modern, safe, and well-equipped neighborhood. It sounded like a dream for a single father looking for a home for his kids. But soon, I realized that beneath the polished exterior was a tightly controlled system where residents had no real freedom in their own homes. Here, everything had to follow the rules of the Homeowners Association, HOA. And at the top of the HOA was Mary Whitmore, a ruthless, powerful woman who showed no mercy to anyone who dared to challenge her. With the help of her lawyer, Rick Holloway, she had crafted a set of convoluted, intimidating rules designed to keep residents constantly on edge, fearing they might break some obscure regulation. Under Mary's rule, Green Park was no different from a small kingdom where she alone decided who could live peacefully and who would be made to suffer. Those who obediently followed her rules were left alone, but anyone who dared to question or resist quickly found themselves targeted. Absurd fines, constant notices about trivial violations like lawn height, curtain colors, or even trash bin placement were all tools the HOA used to maintain its grip on the community. With a system like this, most people chose to stay quiet, pay their dues, and avoid drawing attention. But that was about to change, because I had arrived in Green Park, and I wasn't the type to be pushed around. I'm Daniel Thompson, 38 years old, a mechanic, and a single father. I'm not someone who goes looking for trouble, but I also won't stand for being bullied. When my uncle passed away and left me this house, I saw it as a chance to give my kids a better life. But it turns out, the dream of a peaceful existence here was nothing more than an illusion. From my very first days, I realized Green Park wasn't the paradise I had imagined. Nonsensical HOA notices started showing up in my mailbox. At first, I thought it was just a misunderstanding. The first letter seemed harmless enough. Your lawn exceeds the permitted height, 2 inches. Please trim it within 48 hours to avoid a fine. I frowned as I read it. My lawn was green and well maintained, nowhere near an eyesore. But I didn't want any trouble, so I complied. Then, more notices followed. Your front door does not meet Green Park's aesthetic standards. Please repaint it according to the attached color chart. Your vehicle is not allowed to be parked overnight outside the garage. Your fence is showing signs of wear. If not repaired, you will be fined. It went on and on, day after day. I started to understand that this wasn't just about aesthetics or security. It was a means of control and harassment. And it seemed I had been singled out. I tried to ignore it. I tried to comply. But it was clear that Mary Whitmore and her lawyer, Rick Holloway, had no intention of letting me live peacefully here. The inspections, the warnings, and the fines kept piling up, as if they were determined to drive me out. I wasn't looking for a fight. I just wanted a safe home for my kids. But as the harassment escalated, I knew that if I didn't stand up, I would never find the peace I had hoped for. And this time, I wasn't backing down. I had never been the type to stir up trouble, but from the moment I set foot in Green Park, I sensed something was off. Within days of moving in, my mailbox was flooded with notices from the HOA. The first letter seemed harmless enough. Your lawn exceeds the permitted height, 2 inches. Please trim it within 48 hours to avoid a fine. I frowned as I read it. My lawn was lush and green, far from messy or unkempt. But I didn't want trouble, so I trimmed it as requested. But then, the warnings kept coming. Your front door does not match Green Park's aesthetic standards. Please repaint it according to the attached color chart. Your car cannot be parked outside overnight. Your fence is showing signs of wear. If not repaired, you will be fined. As time went on, I grew more frustrated. These rules weren't just absurd, they seemed to be targeting me specifically. Other houses had overgrown lawns too, yet I didn't see anyone else receiving notices. Still, I tried to brush it off, hoping things would settle down. But I was wrong. One night, after putting my daughters to bed, I was sitting on the couch watching TV when a sharp, shattering noise cut through the silence. My heart pounded as I jumped up and ran outside. Under the dim glow of the streetlight, shards of glass littered my front porch. My living room window had been smashed, fractured lines stretching across the remaining pieces like a spiderweb. Someone had deliberately vandalized my home. I clenched my fists. This was no longer just about ridiculous fines or bureaucratic harassment. This was a threat, and I knew exactly who was behind it. Mary and the hoe had gone too far. I sat in the dimly lit living room, the cold night air seeping through the broken window. The streetlight outside cast fractured shadows on the floor, highlighting the mess of shattered glass. Upstairs, my daughters slept peacefully, unaware of what had just happened. I exhaled slowly, gripping my phone but hesitating to call the police. I had dealt with people like this before, those who thrived on power and intimidation. In the past, I had always chosen to back down, not because I was afraid, but because my priority was keeping my family safe. But this time, if I ignored it, would they stop? Or would the hoe continue pushing until I had no choice but to leave? The wind whistled through the broken window, sending a chill down my spine. I opened my eyes, staring at the shards of glass on the floor. This time, I couldn't ignore it. I couldn't let it slide. In the days following the broken window incident, things only got worse. My mailbox was constantly stuffed with hoe violation notices. Your lawn exceeds 2 inches, violating hoe regulation 14.2. Your garage door color is not on the approved list. Immediate repainting required. Your vehicle is improperly parked. A second violation will result in towing without notice. They were pushing me to my limits. But I wasn't leaving. I wasn't letting them win. I crumpled the letter in my hand and slammed it onto the table. This wasn't about regulations anymore. This was psychological warfare. The hoe didn't just want compliance. They wanted submission. And then, Rick Holloway appeared. That day, as I left my auto shop, a man in a perfectly tailored suit was waiting by a sleek, black luxury car. He smiled, but his eyes were sharp as a blade. "I'm Rick Holloway, legal representative for the hoe." His voice was smooth, like he had rehearsed this line 1,000 times. "We've noticed several outstanding violations on your property. If they aren't resolved soon, we may be forced to take legal action. And trust me, you won't like the outcome." I crossed my arms, meeting his gaze. "Do you really think I'm scared of your little threats?" Rick shrugged and pulled out a thick folder from his briefcase. "I'm just here to help you avoid trouble. But if you'd rather fight, we're more than ready." The blood rushed to my head, but I took a deep breath, refusing to let anger cloud my judgment. I needed more information. I needed to know what the enemy had in their hands. And then, right at that moment, a stranger approached me. "Daniel Thompson?" She lowered her voice, glancing around as if afraid of being watched. "I'm Allie Green. I used to live in Green Park before Mary and Rick ruined my life." I narrowed my eyes, observing her. She looked exhausted, but there was a fire of determination in her gaze. "I have information on them. If you really want to take them down, I can help." I knew I couldn't sit still any longer. The very next day, I secretly installed a security camera system around my house, including a hidden camera at the window that had been broken before. I needed evidence, something the hoe couldn't deny. Meanwhile, Ellie was just as busy. Using her old connections, she secretly gathered a trove of internal hoe documents. It turned out that Mary and Rick had been manipulating the hoe for years, using absurd fees to line their pockets. Anyone who resisted was pressured until they had no choice but to leave the neighborhood. You're not the first person they've targeted, Daniel, but you could be the last, Ellie said, pushing a stack of documents toward me. But just when we were close to gathering enough evidence, something unexpected happened. Rick Holloway came to see me, this time, not with threats, but with an offer. We're both reasonable men, Daniel. He smiled, but I could see the insincerity in his eyes. I know you don't want trouble. If you're willing to back down, I can make all your problems disappear. He pulled a check from his pocket and slid it toward me. The number on it was enough to make anyone think twice. All you have to do is stay quiet, stop investigating, and everything will go back to normal. The hoe won't bother you anymore. I stared at the check for a long moment before slowly pushing it back toward Rick. I'm not someone you can buy. Rick sighed, his gaze turning cold. That's a shame. I was hoping you'd make a smarter choice. He took the check back and left without another word. But I knew he wouldn't stop there, and I was right. That very night, someone crept toward my house. That night, when everything seemed quiet, my security cameras captured undeniable proof. In the darkness, Mary sneaked up to my house, glancing around before picking up a heavy object and hurling it at my window. The sound of shattering glass echoed through the silent night, and then she quickly disappeared as if nothing had happened. The next morning, I didn't hesitate anymore. I sent the video to the local police and organized a community meeting right in Green Park's common area. More residents showed up than ever before, all curious about what was about to happen. I played the video on a large screen. The atmosphere fell silent, then erupted into whispers and outrage. Is this the kind of people we have running our hoe? One resident shouted. Mary's face went pale, but she tried to keep her composure. This is just a misunderstanding. That video could have been edited, but I didn't give her a chance to twist the narrative. If you have nothing to hide, then let the police investigate. The police, having already received the evidence, immediately stepped forward and announced Mary's arrest for vandalism and harassment. She struggled, but she couldn't escape the grip of the law. Rick Holloway, seeing how things were turning against him, scrambled to recover. Mary acted alone. The hoe had nothing to do with this. I'll do everything I can to fix this mess. But Ellie didn't let him off the hook. She held up the stack of documents she had spent weeks gathering. Rick, did you forget that I was one of the HOA's victims? I have enough proof to show how you and Mary have been exploiting residents for years. Rick took a step back, sweat forming on his forehead. The community started chanting for his removal from the hoe. Just when it seemed like everything was coming to an end, a chilling voice rose from the crowd. Do you really think it's that simple? Everyone turned. An older man with a commanding presence stepped forward from the back rows. William Bill Whitmore, Mary's husband, a powerful figure rarely spoken about. I immediately realized his presence here was no coincidence. A deep sense of unease settled over me. Mary was just a pawn, Bill said, his voice calm but dripping with authority. The hoe is still under my control, and don't think for a second that some silly video will change that. The tension in the air was suffocating. I understood then, the real battle had only just begun. I stared at my phone screen, reading a short but chilling message that sent a cold shiver down my spine. Know when to stop, Thompson, or you'll regret it. I looked around, but the neighborhood was as quiet as ever. Still, I knew this was the calm before the storm. The next day, Ellie showed up at my house, looking anxious. I just got word that Bill has hired a new lawyer and is working to have all charges against Mary dropped. On top of that, it seems like he's making plans to get rid of you. I clenched my fists. He wasn't just trying to protect his power, he was willing to play dirty to keep it. But what Bill didn't anticipate was the power of the community. The residents of Green Park, after witnessing my courage and standing up against oppression, began to rally behind me. They organized meetings, gathered evidence of the HOA's corruption under Bill's leadership. A resident who had once worked as the HOA's accountant secretly provided financial documents, revealing that Bill had embezzled community funds for years. The amount totaled hundreds of thousands of dollars, undeniable proof. Now, Bill has nowhere to run, Ellie said, her voice filled with determination. Ellie and I officially filed a lawsuit against Bill, charging him with financial fraud and corruption. The media caught wind of the case, increasing the pressure on him. Eventually, when law enforcement launched an investigation, Bill had no escape. He was forced to resign from the HOA, and just weeks later, he was indicted on multiple charges. For the first time in years, Green Park was truly free from the grip of the corrupt. And I, after everything, could finally smile as I watched my two daughters play in the front yard, knowing that this time, I had stood up and won. In the days following the scandal, news of Mary's arrest and Bill's investigation flooded local media. The residents of Green Park, once suffocated by absurd regulations and authoritarian control, could finally breathe a sigh of relief. Mary was officially charged with vandalism and harassment. The court issued a restraining order preventing her from returning to Green Park, putting an end to the HOA's reign of fear. Rick Holloway, once Mary and Bill's right-hand man, couldn't escape the fallout either. As corruption documents were exposed, the Bar Association revoked his law license. A man who once prided himself on being a master of loopholes was now nothing more than a disgraced name. Bill Whitmore, the mastermind pulling the strings from behind the scenes, suffered the hardest blow. As the financial investigation concluded, overwhelming evidence showed that he had embezzled HOA funds for personal gain. With losses amounting to hundreds of thousands of dollars, Bill had no way out. He was arrested, facing multiple felony charges, and was almost certain to spend a long time in prison. Green Park, after years of oppression, was finally liberated. The residents, who had once lived in fear of the HOA's power, were now more united than ever. They organized new elections to select a fair and transparent HOA board, this time, one that truly represented the interests of the community. A new era began, a Green Park where the residents' voices mattered, no longer puppets under the control of manipulators. After everything, Daniel stood on his porch, looking out at the neighborhood he once hoped would be a peaceful place to start a new life. He had once wished only for a quiet existence with his daughters, staying out of trouble and conflict. But reality had taught him a different lesson. Sometimes, to protect peace, you can't always back down. He had chosen to stand up, not just for himself, but for those around him. The Green Park community had changed too. People who once remained silent and endured injustice now knew how to stand together, reclaiming control of their neighborhood from the hands of corrupt leaders. They formed a new HOA council, one that was fair and transparent, where no one was bullied for refusing to comply with ridiculous rules. Daniel smiled as he saw neighbors who had once lived in fear now speaking up boldly, defending their rights. He hadn't just found peace for his family, he had helped an entire community break free from oppression. And for the first time since moving here, Daniel truly felt that Green Park could become the home he had always hoped for. The golden hues of sunset bathed Green Park in a warm glow. On the porch, Daniel stood with his arms crossed, silently watching his two daughters laughing and playing on the front lawn, the same lawn he had once been fined for being too tall. Now, there were no more threatening letters, no more absurd rules strangling their lives. Ellie walked slowly down the stone-paved street, returning to the neighborhood for the first time in years without fear. She paused at the gate, her eyes scanning the neighbors chatting happily outside, no longer anxious about the HOA's tyranny. She looked at Daniel and gave him a slight nod, a silent thank you. At his doorstep, Daniel picked up a letter that had been slipped into his mailbox. Opening it, he found handwritten words filled with gratitude from a fellow resident. "Thank you, Daniel. Because of you, we are finally free." He smiled, folded the letter, and looked up at the sky. He had done the right thing. Injustice doesn't disappear on its own. It only grows if no one stands against it. Daniel had chosen to take action, and because of that, an entire community was freed from the grip of corruption. This wasn't just a story about one person. It was about the power of unity. When people stand together, no one can oppress them with ridiculous rules. Remember, an HOA, or any organization, does not have control over your life unless you allow them to. Rules should serve the people, not be used as tools for manipulation and profit. Have you ever experienced something similar? Share your story in the comments. And don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Crazy Neighbor Drama so you won't miss the next thrilling story.